Tonight on Greater Boston, two of the Harvard graduate students suing the university for failing to protect them against a prominent professor accused of sexual assault, harassment, and retaliating against them for speaking out. Then later, he once spent 9 months behind bars for selling marijuana. Now Jesse Pitts runs the first social equity business in Massachusetts, licensed to grow, manufacture, and sell the drug legally. Plus, the concerning business model of travel nurses at hospitals here and across the country. And finally, when it comes to Amazon, Spotify, and the NFL, I'm a hypocrite. And you might be too. I'll explain why and what we can do about it ahead. In a case that's making national headlines, 3 women in Harvard's graduate anthropology program are suing the university, accusing school officials of ignoring and failing to protect students from sexual abuse and retaliation by a prominent Harvard anthropology professor. The suit claims that that professor, John Komaroff, quote, used his power and his perch at Harvard to exploit aspiring scholars. He kissed and groped students without their consent, made unwelcome sexual advances, and threatened to sabotage students' careers if they complained. The student at the center of many of the claims is Lilia Kilburn, who says Komaroff's assaults on her started in 2017. The other 2 plaintiffs, Margaret Czerwienski and Amulya Mandava, say they faced career upending retaliation after they warned the university of Kilburn's accusations. All 3 say the university repeatedly brushed them aside and opted to protect its star professor over vulnerable students. And according to the suit, Harvard, in fact, knew of other similar accusations against Komaroff from his time at the University of Chicago when they hired him back in 2012. For his part, Komaroff has categorically denied all allegations against him, which first went public in 2020 in an article in Harvard's student newspaper, The Crimson. After that, Komaroff was put on administrative leave and the university started investigating. But it was only last month that he was barred from teaching required courses or taking on new student advisees for the rest of the academic year after investigations found he, quote, engaged in verbal conduct that violated school harassment and conduct policies. Margaret Czerwienski and Amulya Mandava join me now, along with one of their attorneys, Carolin Guentert. Carolin, Amulya, and Margaret, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Carolin, could you tell us exactly what your client, Lilia Kilburn, contends that Komaroff did to her?
Yes. In our complaint, we allege that Professor Komaroff began a series of harassing actions towards Ms. Kilburn before she even enrolled at Harvard. Before she had enrolled, we allege, he kissed her on the mouth without her consent. Once she did enroll on her first day of graduate school, he graphically described how she would be raped and murdered if she traveled to Africa, more specifically South Africa, as part of her fieldwork. And then later, throughout their advising relationship, he kissed her again, we allege, he groped her, and he increasingly isolated her from her other advisor.
Carolin, when was the university first made aware of these charges from Kilburn?
Ms. Kilburn began reporting to individuals at the university, including the Title IX office and other professors, in 2019.
Margaret, when did you first learn of what had happened to Lilia?
Well, I first learned about Lilia's complaints in 2019, just before the Crimson article came out and reported on systemic abuse in the anthropology
And
department.
Amulya, was the same time frame for you?
Yes.
What did you do, starting with you, Amulya, what did you do when you found out about what Lilia said had happened to her?
When I found out about what had happened to Lilia as alleged in the complaint, I decided that it was time for me to join her in coming forward and reporting to professors in our department and the Title IX office that I myself had had a conversation with Professor Komaroff in which he had threatened myself and Margaret here with career-ending retaliation because we had been sharing warnings with students in our department about his pattern of harassment and abuse.
Margaret, what specifically did Komaroff say to the two of you?
Well, I'll let Amulya answer that because he delivered the message to her directly.
Okay, Amulya, what did he say? What did he say to you?
Happy to answer that. So after we talked a bit about a grant that I was working on, Professor Komarov introduced a conversation in which he told me that he knew that I was talking about his sexual conduct with students at Harvard. This is in the complaint. He told me, as alleged also in the complaint, that he could not have harassed these students that we were talking about because he had been sexually inactive for 7 years due to a medical issue. As you could understand, being alone with him in his office was really disturbed to hear that. As the conversation proceeded, he told me that multiple students who he named at the University of Chicago had also spread what he called rumors about his behavior. And that they, as a result of talking about him, had had trouble finding jobs. And he said he didn't want that to happen to me.
Margaret, did you get any more positive response, more constructive response from anybody in Harvard administration?
Truly, no. I mean, I told a professor in 2017, and they said that they couldn't do anything. I reported to Title IX in 2017, and they did nothing as well. So pretty much always the response we got.
Carolin, you filed this suit after Harvard completed its review. Its findings aren't public, but could you give us some reaction to what you know them to be?
What we know that the conclusion to be is that Professor Komarov was found to have violated Harvard University's Title IX policy for engaging in a conversation about Ms. Kilburn's rape and murder with her. And then a separate that finding was made by the Office of Dispute Resolution at Harvard, the ODR. And then a separate finding was made by an external investigator who was appointed by Harvard's Faculty of Arts and Sciences, who found that Professor Komarov violated the university's professional conduct policy by having made this threat to Ms. Mandava.
So they essentially confirmed some of the charges you were filing against them in their administrative procedure, but not all of them. What have they done? What sanctions have they taken against Komarov, Carolin?
That's exactly right. We believe that this is the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more here. And as set forth in the complaint, much of the story and much of what our three clients bravely brought forward to the Title IX office and to the ODR was disregarded here, and two narrow findings were made. And the sanctions announced against him by Dean Gay in January of this year were that he would be placed on an administrative leave for 1 semester, and then for the following academic year, he would be unable to teach required courses. And some limitations have been placed on his ability to advise graduate students. And Dean Gay explained that after the 2022 to 2023 academic year, the decision would be revisited.
So theoretically, at that point, the university could decide to reinstate him in some capacity?
That's possible. I believe that's possible.
Carolin, you also allege that the university has a long history of failing to protect students from this kind of behavior beyond Komarov. Could you fill in a few blanks there?
We do allege that. As we explain in the complaint, our clients were of course aware of the conduct that Professor Komarov took against them as well as Ms. Kilburn. But beyond that, they didn't have much knowledge. And then when the Harvard Crimson broke a story in the summer of 2020 that Professor Komarov wasn't the only one who was engaging in misconduct within the anthropology department, our clients learned that there were also serious allegations against Professor Bester and Professor Urton. And of course, we know that there is also a history of misconduct that has been reported against Professor Jorge Dominguez. And we believe that this is all part of a pattern and practice, and that there's been a culture of silence specifically within the anthropology department that is now coming to light finally.
Margaret, what reaction do you get from fellow students when they hear not only about what was done to Lilia Kilburn, but about the retaliation you and Amulya are suggesting was directed at you? What do they say to you? What's the impact on them?
I mean, I think a lot of students are shocked, but they're also experiencing similar things. And it's actually really disheartening to hear how many people are experiencing this, both at Harvard and on other campuses across the country.
And Amulya, the Globe reporting talks about 38 professors at Harvard, a handful of whom are about as prominent get, who signed a statement in support of Komarov, apparently without bothering to investigate what he was actually being charged with. What kind of impact did that have on you when some huge names in the Harvard academic community sided with this guy without apparently even trying to get your side of the story?
Yeah, and I would add to that that some of the people who signed that letter are professors who have mentored, employed, or advised Margaret, Lily, and I directly, and yet we were not reached out to, to find out the facts of the story.
So what's your reaction to that? What's your reaction to that? In a community that's supposed to be so concerned, not only about decent treatment of people in their community, but also about fact-finding and doing things based on what's real. What's your reaction to that?
I think on the one hand, it is a tremendous show of the power of a star tenured faculty member to mobilize a network that will retaliate against students. I think it also is a sign of a larger systemic problem at Harvard when famous tenured professors are willing to sign a statement such as that and risk chilling the speech of other students besides Margaret, Lilia, and myself, who may, in many ways, want to come forward, may have wanted to report, and now they've seen advisors of theirs have signed the letter, and they may never come forward now. And I don't think the impact of this statement on student speech can be underestimated.
Carolin, what are you seeking in this litigation?
More than anything, we hope to shine a light on what has been quiet and bubbling under the surface and ignored for far too long. As we allege in the complaint, there's a history of misconduct here, much of which Harvard knew about. And we just hope that despite the retaliation that Amulya was just describing, that other students, other faculty, anybody who knows something or who's been harassed has the courage to come forward.
Margaret, are you worried about what impact this all has on your career going forward?
Absolutely. I think right now I feel as though I don't have a career in anthropology moving forward.
Why do you say that?
John Komarov's network, as we've seen from this letter, is extensive. It's in every major anthropology department in the world. And even with the backlash from this, there's still reason to believe that he has the ability to influence hiring decisions at campuses.
Amulya, do you share the same concerns that Margaret has?
Undoubtedly, yes.
I wish all three of you luck. I hope you'll stay in touch with us. We'd like to stay on top of this story. Thank you so much for your time tonight. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. A new cannabis store set to open in Wareham at the end of this month will mark a milestone, a long time coming for the state. The first social equity applicant to be triple licensed to cultivate, manufacture, and sell marijuana and related products. In 2007, Jesse Pitts was arrested after 70 pounds of marijuana and $250,000 in cash were seized from a house he was renting. He spent 9 months in jail for possession with intent to distribute, followed by probation and 500 hours of community service. Well, now he's the co-founder and CEO of Trade Roost. It's a product of the state's social equity program, which was set up by the Cannabis Control Commission specifically to help people directly affected by the war on drugs and marijuana prohibition to get them in on the legalized industry. But since that program was unveiled in 2018, only 13 of the 350 businesses that have reached the commence operations phase fall into that social equity category, 3 of which, as I've said, have now gone to one man, Jesse Pitts, who joins me now. Jesse, congratulations. Good to have you here. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. It's great to be here, and I appreciate the opportunity.
My pleasure. In the beginning, did you face obstacles getting into the industry, the legal industry, because of your conviction?
Yeah, so really after college, I had and after my arrest that you stated, I had a college roommate reach out to me and he wanted to start a medical marijuana company. And at first I said, absolutely not. But after about 10 times of asking me, I finally, I jumped in and I said, let's try to figure this out. And it was a long process to be able to write the application and to get all the things together that the state wanted for that application. And after we were ready to apply and we were applying, it was an ongoing process. The state rewrote the regulations saying that if you have a cannabis record, you can no longer even be an employee for a medical marijuana company in Massachusetts. So that really was the first roadblock for me trying to get into the legal industry.
So the social equity program obviously made a difference, I'm assuming. What specifically about that helped get you from that point to owning 3 licenses?
So when the CCC first rolled out the adult use regulations, the first thing that I was looking at is, can I actually participate? And they took an about face here, and the state said that if you do have a cannabis record and you were affected by the war on drugs, then you were eligible for the social equity program. The original rollout of the program, you had to be a 51% owner of the company and maintain that throughout the existence of the company. And there were other little regulations that it included, that you had to hire a certain amount of social equity candidates onto your team, so on and so forth. So when we actually applied with Trade Routes for our 3 licenses, we applied as a general applicant. And the social equity program, what it does is it gives you kind of a leg up in that application processing of that. And it really is supposed to streamline that process for you. And we decided not to do that because in order to launch a company of this caliber, it takes a lot of fundraising. And in order to do that, I never pictured myself owning over 51% of it when it was all said and done. So we applied as a general applicant. We got our licenses. The CCC rewrote the social equity program saying you only had to be a 10% owner. So in the second cohort, I applied and we got accepted. And what it did is it offered a lot of information that I was not aware of that would help you throughout the application process. And unfortunately for me, a lot of this came after the fact. I'd already been through a lot of the hurdles that they were teaching us. So it wasn't so much of a huge leg up for me, but it definitely was. It felt like some sort of validation and vindication that, you know, what we were doing before, you know, the moral compass was actually correct.
Do you think the social equity program as it's currently constructed going forward will help Jesse Pitzes in the future, people like you?
Yes. I mean, the CCC, you know, when they first rolled it out, there was a lot to, you know, the basic groundworks for it, and they had to start from scratch to write this program. So there's a lot of learning curve on their part as well. And they have changed some things. For instance, the 10% ownership, that was a big aspect of it. But they're also working through different parts of it where there is this pre-approval process for licenses. And that was one of the biggest hurdles early on, was you had to have a host community agreement in order to apply for a license with the state. But in order to get that host community agreement, you had to have possession of a building and have all these things in line. And it proved very challenging, not really having anything tangible to hold on to help raise funds while you're going through that process to obtain a building and to really get your feet under you. So it kept being the cart before the horse over and over.
When you were sitting in jail, if someone had said to you, X number of years forward, you're going to own 3 licenses to cultivate, manufacture, and sell legally marijuana, what would you have said to that person?
They're crazy.
I figured. So what's your advice today, Jesse, to someone who wants to go from street dealer to a legitimate seller? What's your advice to them about how to get from there to here as you've done?
The biggest thing is, you know, take the leap of faith. And, you know, to me, it was an all in or not proposition. You can't really be doing both. And, you know, to take that leap and step out of that realm and into this one, you know, it really takes a lot of courage, and you're navigating the unknown, and you just can't be afraid to fail. That's the biggest one. When do you
open?
Famous question. So we're hoping to be open, but it's all contingent upon one final inspection from the CCC, which is coming up on the 17th. if all goes well, then we'll have more of a definitive date. But I've been strongly urged not to give a date.
But in the relatively near future?
Yes, hopefully by the end of the month, if not early next month.
Well, congratulations on the whole thing, Jesse, both from the change in your life to the terrific opportunity it appears you have ahead. Thanks so much for your time, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Demand for nurses is at an all-time high, according to the American Hospital Association. And as Liz Neisloss reports, Massachusetts, like just about every other state, has been forced to turn to an expensive option to help fill the gap: travel nurses. And these days, many aren't traveling all that far.
I've always had a wanderlust, and when I became a nurse, I found out a little bit more about travel nursing, and so a little over a year I've been traveling.
Ads like that might make you think vacation, but given the nursing shortage, 28-year-old Kat Piper says seeing the sights isn't what's driving travel nurses now.
They're coming in to make their money and go, and it's for a lot of people, it's life-changing money.
Nursing shortages existed well before the pandemic, and travel nurses filled staffing gaps. But burnout, low morale, and low pay have caused an exodus of staff nurses during the COVID crisis. Demand for travel nurses now outstrips supply, with the need in Massachusetts 20% higher than last year. And they're filling some of the toughest nursing jobs in a hospital. Piper works in medical ICU at Boston Medical Center, where she sees the sickest of COVID patients. And though she's a travel nurse, Piper's never left Massachusetts. She started traveling within the state just before the pandemic.
I went to a few different places, try to find where I wanted to be staff. And then since the pandemic hit, rates have increased astronomically, and I've stayed in it really for money to try to buy a house. When I was staff in Worcester before the pandemic, I was making a third of what I make now. So it's hard to even compare. And honestly, I feel guilty a lot of the times because I'm working the same job that all these other nurses are, and our pay and compensation is not comparable.
Travel nurses traditionally made more than staff, but the current massive disparity in pay has created tension.
Now what we're finding is people are traveling and leaving one hospital and going down the street and traveling at the next hospital for 2 to 3 times the salary. For staff to sit there and know you're working with somebody at the same pace, or maybe even teaching somebody how to do something, and they're able to, only be here for 13 weeks is hard.
But despite the pay perks, travel nurses find being on the front lines in a pandemic takes its toll, just like any other nurse.
I think the stress levels are probably some of the highest I've ever seen in my career.
Recently, the American Hospital Association accused contract labor firms of exploiting the crisis and creating unsustainable costs. But healthcare experts say reliance on travel nurses has kept hospitals from focusing on long-standing staffing issues. Staffing was at the heart of the state's longest-running nurses' strike, recently resolved. But it remains a national issue, and nurses say raise pay and ratios to patients, and you'll keep more staff nurses. Liz Neisloss, GBH News.
A bipartisan group of around 200 House lawmakers, including 6 from Massachusetts, is pushing for the White House to investigate the growing pay discrepancy between travel nurses and staff nurses around the country and potential price gouging by some nursing staff agencies. My name is Jim Braude, and I am a hypocrite. I go on the radio every day saying unkind but well-deserved things about Amazon, mostly about how they treat their workers, evade safety regulations, get billions in tax breaks, and take customers away from the kind of neighborhood, small, independent places I say I love. And yet I do hit add to cart to buy batteries I could purchase from the local hardware store. Well, I did, until I took a pledge not to buy one thing from Amazon for 1 week, and I haven't. But will I continue to resist? And then there's Spotify. Love Neil Young and Joni Mitchell, not just for the music, but for standing up for what they believe in. Have contempt for Joe Rogan for what he believes in, which is spreading homicidal information about COVID. But have I left Spotify? Well, I talked about it, but then finally, I switched to Tidal over the weekend, but only after I read about Rogan's affinity for the N-word. The Trump channeling COVID stuff probably should have been enough to join the other 19% of customers who dump the service or plan to, don't you think? But now I am ready. The Super Bowl's on Sunday, you may have heard. Love wings, love being a potted plant for maybe 12 hours, but this time, the hypocrite in me will not win out. I will not be joining 90 million or so of my countrymen. I am not watching. A couple of reasons. Racism, for one. Here's Brian Flores' lawyer with me last week, just after filing suit against the league.
He's been getting just a groundswell of support from players, from former coaches, GMs, et cetera. I mean, he's, the only person, the only entity now that's not supporting him really is the NFL, who literally an hour after we filed this 60-page lawsuit without having done any investigation, demonstrating a total lack of introspection, just declared that it was without merit. To say that we've made progress when almost 20 years ago, when the Rooney Rule was passed, there were more black head coaches in the NFL than there are today is ridiculous.
And then there's the thoroughly believable allegation that Flores was offered a $100,000 bribe for every game he'd throw. Okay, let's fly north to D.C., where the misogynistic owner of what would have been called the Redskins forever, had FedEx not said they'd end their sponsorship, has been secretly making lewd videos of cheerleaders while fostering a culture of sexual harassment. I'm not done yet. Then there's the team I would have rooted for on Sunday. That's the Cincinnati Bengals. I love upstarts, sort of like that team in the 2001 season going up against the greatest show on turf. But when you read about Cincinnati's star running back, Joe Mixon, knocking a woman unconscious not too long ago, and a week ago he competed against another star player, Tyreek Hill, who beat and choked his pregnant girlfriend, it's too much even for me. And don't forget, there's the race norming, concussion denial, and of course, Colin Kaepernick. And what's the $1 million a week man, the league's commissioner, Roger Goodell, doing about all this? Whatever the misbehaving owners tell him to. So as I said, I will not be watching Super Bowl LVI. Instead, I'll be listening to A Case of You and Southern Man, both on the Tidal app, using a remote powered by batteries I bought at Inman Square Hardware, to tune into a competition which you don't have to rationalize watching to anyone. Animal Planet's Puppy Bowl XVIII, proving, I hope, that you can teach an old hypocrite new tricks. That's it for tonight. Please come back tomorrow. CNN legal analyst and former federal prosecutor Laura Coates joins me on Republican attacks on voting rights, her new book, it's called Just Pursuit, and getting snubbed by Jeopardy despite a recommendation from Alex Trebek. That and more tomorrow at 7. Thank you for watching. Please stay safe.
New dawn.
New vibe.
New duo. Join me, Paris Alston.
And me, Jeremy Siegel.
For GBH's Morning Edition.
Your spot for local news and fresh insights.
To kick off your morning and inspire your day.
Weekdays from 5 to 10 on 89.7.